Hello, Sooner Nation, OU Insider subscribers, Coach Brian Clinton enthusiasts. Brian, I usually have a third one in this list. I don't have one. I don't have one today because my mind is on the big picture of Oklahoma athletics, the Oklahoma football program specifically. And because of that, I don't have a third one. Happy New Year to everybody. This is our first show of the new year. This is another episode of the Oklahoma Drill, a podcast fueled by OU Insider and the Rivals Network. And everybody out there tuning in, I got to tell you something. Before we hit record just now, Brian goes, feels like we haven't done one of these in a year. And I thought he was doing the I haven't seen you since last year type of jokes. Brian, that's not what you were.
No,
That's not what you were doing.
clearly not that clever.
I disagree. I would say that you are so far above that awful played out joke that it didn't even occur to you as a possible joke that you could have made.
There you go. Yeah, that's a positive way of looking at it.
We need some positivity, Brian.
Yeah.
We need some positivity. But before we dive into everything OU football, because a lot has happened since the last time you and I talked, we didn't actually do a pod last week. It's the first week we've missed since we started doing this in September of 23, I think. Any New Year's resolutions for you? Are you a resolutions guy?
I used to be really heavy into it, but then I realized how quickly those things typically fall off. And then it's probably because I would set unrealistic expectations for my, like, I'm going to work out for every day for the rest of my life. And then, yeah, it doesn't, 3 weeks into it, you're eating donuts and sitting on the couch again. Mine was really simple this year, though, is drink more water. Like, I know that that's like super simple, but I think if I drink a little bit more water, I'll feel a lot better in my daily. And it's worked so far, a few days of it. So only downside is, multiple bathroom breaks, but it is what it is.
I feel like I started, so I got a gym membership in mid-December. So I feel like in that, coupled with I completely gave up alcohol about 6 months ago. So I feel like most of the New Year's resolutions I already kind of did them.
You're
So
like
basically,
mid-year resolutions.
yeah, that's basically me saying that I have ascended as such a good high moral person that
Correct.
I'm above typical New Year's resolutions. But everybody else out there on a lower plane, keep fighting, keep working. I believe in you guys.
And those of you that go to public gyms and have been for a while, just hold out. Just hold out. Just give it a month. Things will get back to normal. You won't have to share your machine with somebody who doesn't understand how to use it. Just give them time.
If it makes you feel any better, I am that person that doesn't know what they're doing, and it's been a month, and I still don't know. I hadn't lifted weights since I was in high school. I'm not kidding. It had been like 10 years. And I get to the first time I go to do the bench press, it's a 25-pound bar. I go to put, like, I think 20 on each side, and I'm struggling. I'm struggling. And that's when I was like, oh, yeah. I have no upper body muscle, like, at all.
Yeah, that's a really good way to be humbled.
Yes.
Pretty quick. Yeah.
I thought, oh, sure, what is this, like 65 pounds? I'll be fine.
Yeah.
Nope.
Nope.
First time, no, I was not. So actually, if that makes anybody out there feel better, just know I have no muscle. I'm going to the gym to try to actually build muscle, where most people have a baseline of muscle and then try to improve upon it. I'm just trying to have muscle in general. Brian, I think since the last time we recorded, OU lost to Navy. We were in Fort Worth for the most forgettable 36 hours ever, I think.
Yep.
Zach Alley left for West Virginia, something that still remains crazy to me to think about.
Unresolved.
Yeah. Lewis Carter hit the portal. It's not official as of right now, but things would suggest that Wes Goodwin from Clemson will likely be hired as the defensive coordinator at Oklahoma. And Brian, we've got a lot of big picture things to talk about with Oklahoma because I know, look, we work for a message board. We're both on Twitter. I've never seen the fan base this uneasy,
Yeah.
this anxious, this rightfully concerned about the state of things. But before we dive into any of that, um, what's your thought on not only Zach Alley's departure, but I mean, there's a lot of ways that Brent Venables could have handled filling that role.
Yeah.
And this is again all within the backdrop of next year being a make it or break it year for Venables. There's a lot of ways he could have gone. Wes picking Wes Goodwin, if that's the way this goes, feels it that feels like that's choosing a specific path out of several paths that were
Yeah.
there. And
Yeah.
before I give you my thoughts, I'm curious about what yours are because we haven't actually talked about it.
Yeah. No, the last time we discussed this um was actually in Fort Worth. We were just having a discussion about whether or not there was this possibility of Allie leaving because at that point the rumors were out there. Um and of course I didn't I didn't want to agree or believe that that was the case. I was thinking my mind it was like why would you leave Oklahoma for West Virginia? But then as you so eloquently put it, you mean there were reasons. There were reasons to do that and not being the main guy that you really attribute the defense to is always going to be something that a defensive coordinator has to deal with under Brent Venables. And so I think that coupled with just the things that you hear about working for Brent Venables, just how he is very demanding, which is something that you hear about. You hear about a lot of the of great coaches. I mean, that was one of the most consistent things you heard about Nick Saban during his time. That now, obviously, um, the precedence is set there that Saban had a lot more success at this point, but um, I guess that's not true. But anyways, um, we kind of look at if Wes Goodwin is the guy. To me, that says this is going to be Brent Venables' defense still. Um, that's who's probably going to be calling your defense. Um, and to me, this says he has. In my mind, it would say Venables looks at this in a light of I've done this for years. I've had success doing it this way for years. There's no reason for me to change it now. And he's going to go down swinging, I guess, is the way that he's probably looking at this. If he's going to go down uh, uh, next year, um, he's going to do it with the way that he knows best, I guess is the best way of putting that. He's going to stick with what he knows and trust that that's going to be the best opportunity for him to move forward and to continue progressing in this program. Because if you look at it, I mean, the defense really has changed a lot since his time taking over, and I think it's still been the way he ran it at Clemson. And with Goodwin potentially coming in, I would say it's probably going to be more of the same.
I'll tell you this. Zach Alley had way more to do with the defense than Ted Roof ever did. He just
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
It's not even close, really.
Yeah.
I mean, Ted Roof was defensive coordinator kind of in name only.
Yeah.
I think you saw ways that Zach Alley had an influence on this defense. Even some of the three-man stuff or three-man front stuff that they experimented with, I think that was some Alley stuff. I
Mhm.
think we also saw more packages this year with more safeties on the field.
Yeah.
Um, three safety lineups, really heavy secondary lineups. Um, Allie had his footprint there, and I do think part of it, especially after Latrell was fired, Venables did have more of a hand in the offense over the second half of the year. He did than he normally
Yeah.
does.
Yeah.
But to me, like if you juxtapose the hiring of Ben Arbuckle at offensive coordinator and the presumed hiring of Wes Goodwin at defensive coordinator from when you juxtapose those, Ben Arbuckle is a guy that Brent had no prior connection to. There's nothing to connect them there.
Right.
And Brent Venables is bringing Ben Arbuckle in to completely retool that offense. And I think Venables is all if Venables had his druthers, it would always be that his involvement in the offense would be minimal.
Yep.
When you look at the hire of Wes Goodwin, it's every defensive coordinator that Venables has brought to Norman are guys that he had connections with. It was Ted Roof and their time at Clemson. It's Zach Alley, their time at Clemson. Wes Goodwin now their time at Clemson. Brian, when you look at Wes Goodwin and he's been the defensive coordinator at Clemson the last 3 years, he has spent most of his time at Clemson. I dove through some of the numbers. He started as a graduate assistant in 09. He was a defensive analyst in 2012. He was elevated to that role when Venables got there. Then he took over as defensive coordinator in 22. I mean, the defensive numbers are fine. They're fine.
Yeah.
In 22, they were 22nd in scoring defense, 28th in total defense. In 23, they were 8th in total defense. That's great. Those are good numbers. Last year or this past year, 24, those numbers drop a bit. 53rd in scoring defense, 69th in total defense. Now, Clemson makes it to the college football playoff. That's great. But, even with some of the weird stuff with his exit from Clemson, that whole situation has been odd. All of that was to say, if you juxtapose these hires, and I mentioned earlier these kind of paths that Brent could have gone on. He could have went a similar route with Arbuckle and hired somebody he didn't really have a connection with,
Yeah.
and somebody to come in and kind of remake this defense. Or you can go the route of kind of doubling down, bringing
Yeah.
somebody to maybe take some of the day to day, but obviously the defense still has Venables footprints all over it. And this
Yeah.
is when it gets into the weird conundrum with Brent, which is, do you want him to take a step back from the defense? Probably not,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
OU's defense was good this year. It wasn't elite. It was good. Defense was good and a lot better than it had been over the last decade. And I mean, they were top 25 most of the year in scoring defense and rushing defense. They started this season on fire when it came to takeaways. That slowed down a little bit, but sacks, tackles for loss, you look at all these metrics, and then also you just look at it on the field.
Yeah.
But also and we're going to get into this in a little bit, but there's also just 3 years under Brent can kind of be defined as just chaos. There's just it's this team just sometimes seems disorganized, and it just again that goes to that conundrum of like, you brought Brent in to rebuild the defense. The defense is rebuilt, but does this hire signal that he's gonna have more to do with the defense? And are you risking there being more disorganization elsewhere, or are you banking on Ben Arbuckle being such an organizer, being so in tune and in charge of that offense that it all levels out? And I think that's kind of what I'm left wondering.
Yeah. So kind of the way that I would look at this balance wise, and I rambled a bit ago. But this is now that my thoughts are a little more organized on this. This hire, if it does come to fruition, what it it shows me is that this side of the ball, the defensive side of the ball, Brent feels is playing at a level that can win football games, win championships. And I would agree with that. I think the game script changes completely. Uh, it's not a coincidence that things as Oklahoma got into SEC play and we saw similar game scripts. There were things that happened that the defense really couldn't control. And the wheels kind of fall off in some games, South Carolina being one of them. Um, when you look at that, if Wes Goodwin's the hire, that tells me Brent has seen this defense run. He's done this for years. This is a guy that's familiar with how he wants things done, and he can almost just continue status quo, um, trusting that that is what's going to happen. Because at the end of the day, Brent's going to be the guy that's overseeing things and writing off on things. But Goodwin should be able to handle most, if not all, of the day to day things that Brent wants done on that side of the football. On the other side, going out and hiring somebody that you have no familiarity with, to me, that says this thing got to change big time and it's got to change fast. And there needs to be shock and awe on that side of the football. Like has to be. Um, and I think the balance of bringing in a guy like Arbuckle, but also retaining the majority, retaining your entire offensive staff. Um, to me, that says your relationships are built because players are spending the most time with those position coaches outside of the strength and conditioning staff. Um, that is the best way to do this. Arbuckle is going to essentially coach those position coaches and those guys that are already familiar with the players underneath them can hand down these new rules, new whatever that they're going through. And it's a good way of getting a lot of change on the offense, which is absolutely what has to happen, and hopefully minimal change on defense when it comes to just the day to day.
And I agree. I think some of this also comes with I think if you can look at this as a continuity move, I mean, there's so much changing not only across the college football landscape, but Oklahoma in general. I mean, you look at
Yeah.
they have telegraphed how much this front office structure is changing. How
Yeah.
much? I mean, I think these next few months you're going to see Oklahoma transition to operating very differently. And I think, I mean, really is an athletic department, but I think specifically when it comes to football, I think you're going to see guys in different roles. I think you're going to see new roles created. I think you're going to see more emphasis on some things and less emphasis on others.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I just this is so weird, Brian, because I think when you look at it from a football perspective and you think, well, hell, Oklahoma's coming off its second 6-7 season in 3 years. That
Yep.
alone is enough for concern. That enough is, stuff's got to change, right?
Yeah.
Then you couple that with all of this other stuff that is coming. Um, whether that's getting Randall Stevenson to come in to help stuff, whether that's Jake Rosenthal to come in and do different stuff. OU just lost their assistant GM earlier today. There's a front office restructuring, and I, this is a little bit different than what we were talking about, but I think about it in the context of hiring Wes Goodwin. I think there's an argument to be made that if you're looking at Oklahoma football as a sinking ship, if that's the way you want to look at it, then bringing in someone who there's no guesswork, There's no real variables. There's no real
Right.
unknowns. You
Yep.
know what you get, what you're bringing in.
Yep.
And you're doing it with a defense that I think still has room to grow. That
Mm-hmm.
still, that I think we've seen the jump from rebuilding to average to good. I think there's still that good to elite jump
Mm-hmm.
that this defense needs to make. Maybe you do it with Venables having his hand in the defense more than ever. Maybe Goodwin has a bigger role than I think he will. I don't know, man. This is just,
Yeah.
it's hard to you you start having these discussions and they start getting real big picture, real big picture
Mm-hmm.
really quick. Really,
Yeah.
really quick.
And I think that's natural because of how much rides on next season. 2025 is, we said it coming into 2024, that this was the biggest year, most important year of Oklahoma football in a long time. And you almost double down on that next year because if things don't work out, if standards aren't met, I mean, you're talking about hitting the reset button on this program, which is just it's unfathomable to think about that just in the greater context of OU football. But that's really where you're at, and so yeah, everything does feel big picture.
Also, I said Rosenthal earlier. I meant Rosenberg. Jake
I know what you meant.
Rosenberg.
Yeah,
My brain's fried.
it's all good, dude.
My brain's fried. I told you I was at women's basketball last night, which OU women's basketball team is always fun. Um, to hell with college basketball refs because last night was abysmal. Anybody that watched the game, we're recording this on Friday afternoon. Goodness, that game was brutal. Sorry, Jake Rosenberg, Randall Stevenson. Those are kind of your two guys that I think are having a big part of this front office changing of the guard, so to speak. But Brian, we let's talk big picture because I mean we're in not unfamiliar territory specifically because everybody's going to point to how bad things were in the late 90s before Bob Stoops took over. But when you think about it in the context of Oklahoma being in the SEC now, um, when you think about just how much instability there has been in the first 3 years under Brent, when you
Hmm.
think about it with revenue sharing potentially coming down the pike, when you think about the rise in NIL, the rise in the transfer portal, Oklahoma's place in the landscape of things, I think this is unfamiliar territory. I don't
Yeah,
think Oklahoma's been in any situation like this. And Oklahoma damn sure hasn't been in a situation where they're going into next year knowing, hey, if this thing doesn't turn around very
yeah,
quickly, we're going to be doing a new head coaching search again.
yeah.
Probably also looking at other assistant coaches again. And all of this happening as all of these big picture, big large scale changes are happening within the athletics department. We're going to talk about a lot of the bad and we're going to talk about a lot of the reason for concern. But I think people need some positivity. And you know what? It's a new year. It's 2025. We're not forcing positivity. We're not going to force it.
Oh no, I
Not going to
mean,
force it. But Brian, if you want to, if there are a couple things you can point to, or if there are a couple of things people could point to in terms of reason for optimism that this thing can be better next season and that things can stabilize, what what does that look like? What are those things that if you can point to?
well, I'm the right person to ask about this because I mean, I feel pretty level headed about most things. It doesn't feel like Oklahoma just signed the number one player in the transfer portal, which is a big deal. I mean, John Mateer could have gone anywhere he wanted to. He ended up at Oklahoma. That's a big deal. Like the the really funny part about all of this, and like just a couple of years back, my perspective probably looks a lot different on this, but if you're just good on offense next year, like if you're just good, not great, like if you're just good on offense, you have your team is so much better. Like I mean, the defense has an opportunity to be really good to great, and I think the offense could be great if things all just align right. I mean, we saw it with Arbuckle and Mateer before, so who knows? But I think if you just have to make incremental improvements on offense, and you're a better football team, and that helps your defense out too. So like it's not all three phases of the game really are important. Like I mean, look at go back and watch that Arizona State Texas game a couple of days ago. I mean, it all ties together. Um, so I would say incremental improvements is all you need to be a better football team. Um, John Mateer is a big deal, and I think if you're really looking at this from a perspective of what does 2025 look like what does success look like in 2025, um, one of the things that made this schedule for Oklahoma this year tough is you were playing Jackson Dart, you were playing Brady Cook, you were playing um, Jalen Milrow, you were playing like all of these guys, uh, all of these big name quarterbacks with experience, and a lot of those guys are gone next year. I mean, everybody else is dealing with the same issues that Oklahoma is right now, just as far as like depth pieces leaving. I mean, the transfer portal does not pick and choose; it's hitting everyone. So, um, I think all things considered, Oklahoma's actually done a pretty good job keeping the guys that it wanted to. Um, they've really been able to keep a couple of guys who had options to maybe go to the NFL or go somewhere else. So you have those pieces back. There's reasons to be optimistic. Um, but I would say it's never as good as it looks. It's never as bad as it looks.
I'll tell you this. I spoke to. I've got a story coming out on Mateer. Hopefully sometime next week. I've talked to some people around him. One person in particular who told me, I asked them, does Mateer kind of know what he's walking into in terms of just how much rides on this next season and rides on him specifically and what he's going to be tasked to do? And the thing I get back from people close to him is that he's built for stuff like this, that this stuff isn't going to phase him.
Yeah.
I think when you talk to people around him, it's hard not to be excited about what he's going to bring to Norman.
Yeah.
His work ethic, his mentality, the way guys rally for him. And I think I don't ever want to throw around the Baker Mayfield thing too much. I don't, because Baker Mayfield
Hey,
won.
I I did on
Yeah,
on YouTube. It's
yeah. But that's no, like, I don't want to, but it's there with him. It
yeah.
is. And I think when not only watching him play, but I think when you talk to people near him, and I'm not just talking about friends and family. I think when you talk to people who have played roles in his development, they'll tell you he's just different. He is just a different guy.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of arguments that he's exactly what Oklahoma needs, both in terms of on-field talent and in terms of galvanizing guys off the field.
Yeah.
He's that type of guy. And I think the simplest way you can put it is, if you put an average offense with this year's defense, that probably gives you a couple more wins, at
Mm-hmm.
least. Right? I mean, this offense was not only historically bad, Brian. I once the 2-point conversion missed against Navy and that game was over, I was like, thank God I don't have to watch this team anymore.
Yep.
I'll just be honest with you.
I made the comment several times, just shoot the horse, man.
Yeah.
Like go for two, win or lose, just shoot the horse. It
Yeah.
sounds terrible, but I mean, that's just where we were at.
No, it is. And when you think about, I, I think my expectations are still going to be like, I don't think this offense is going to turn around and be a top 10 offense next year. I just don't. Even if, at least I'm not going to have that expectation.
Yeah.
Even if everything hits, right? Because, look, I think you can be excited about some of these receiver additions. Um, the running back room should be good, although, man, we got to start talking about how weird the running back room has been the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, goodness, that's a whole. We'll talk about that in a second. Um, really, the only questions are: can that offensive line be better? Can a couple of these portal additions, coupled with some growth from Logan Howland, Heath Ozida, if Jacob Sexton and Jake Taylor can come back and be healthy. Um, but I think I mean, Mateer and Arbuckle are going to give you an identity on offense that Oklahoma just never had at any point this year. Just
Yeah.
did.
Yeah.
And then when you look defensively, the fact that, I mean, you could look at that secondary and feel pretty damn good with Robert Spears Jennings and Peyton Bowen. Maybe a couple of those other guys hit. Michael Boganowski, Jaden Hardy, maybe a couple of those guys hit. Defensive line, I don't know what's going on with our Mason Thomas. I'll just be honest with y'all. Maybe we'll know something by the time this is published. I don't know. I can tell you that one Oklahoma wouldn't have tweeted that post about him returning unless there was something with paperwork done and finalized. I can just tell you that. So I don't know what's going on with all that. If he returns, you look at that defensive line and it's like, well, look at the interior. You've got Grayson Halton back and Dominic
Mm-hmm.
Williams back and Jaden Jackson back and David Stone. If you can get our Mason Thomas back, you look at that DN room and it's like, well, yeah, you're gonna need PJ Adebawara. This was kind of a weird year for him. You need him to get healthy and have a leap. You're going to need someone like Danny Okoye to take a step up, right? But the pieces are there.
Yeah.
You look at linebacker, and all of a sudden that linebacker room's there's a little bit of lack of depth with losing Stutzman and Kobe McKenzie and Lewis Carter. But if they land someone like Kendall Daniels out of Oklahoma State, anyways, I think there's reason to feel confident, especially on a defensive perspective, that things could be really good. And
Yeah.
if you just get an average offense, you know, things could feel a lot better. And if the wide receiver room doesn't collapse under the weight of a million injuries,
Yeah.
you know?
So something that I think doesn't get talked about enough with just how important it is to a team that Oklahoma just didn't have this year. And this isn't a knock on Jackson Arnold. This isn't a knock on Michael Hawkins. Um, when the defense needed a play, when the defense needed somebody to look to, your green dot guy was it was Danny Stutzman. Like he knew he'd been through the fire. Like those guys are looking to him and knowing that he is going to be the first one running into the fire to help them out. Like that's just the kind of persona that he has. And so for the people that don't like the Baker Mayfield comps, even though it is there are parts to the game that are similar between Mateer and Mayfield. Maybe that's the better comparison. I would say the off field, the intangibles, the moxie, the leadership, that stuff is what you get with Mateer that you maybe lacked um, this year. Because I think a lot of the issues Jackson Arnold's going to be like this can be soundbite. This you can take this soundbite and run with it. Jackson Arnold will be successful at some level in college football. I think he will. He has all of the athletic talent there. I think the issue was his confidence was killed before it could ever get going. Um, Mateer brings a boatload of confidence. in with him, but he also brings those leadership skills that made guys like Baker Mayfield, like Tim Tebow, like Matt Leinart, like these guys that really played huge roles for their teams and led their teams to great things. He has that same stuff with him. Will he get there with Oklahoma? I don't know, but he has shown already to have that leadership skill, and so that's the better way of putting it. Is you have those pieces, you have the athletes. Oklahoma's roster is, I mean, just as far as star power goes, as far as blue chip ratings, Oklahoma's right up there where they need to be a championship contender. They just didn't have the guy that was grabbing a sword and running in there first. And I think you have to have that on both sides of the ball if you want a player led team, which is really what Venables is trying to produce. And you just didn't have that on one side of the ball this year. So I do think that's a big addition and something to be looking forward to.
Well, not to mention that they've got Michael Fasusi, who
Stud.
is just gonna. I mean, he might
Stud.
come in. He might come in and demand a starting job from day one. I mean,
Yep.
that's the kind of talent he
Looked
has.
incredible.
Yeah,
Absolutely incredible this week.
super blue chip. I mean, he's a difference maker. He's the
Yep.
kind of guys that OU needs.
Yep.
And I mean, I don't know why he wouldn't be able to walk in. Yeah, again, I'm not trying to put too heavy of expectations on him, but I don't know why he wouldn't be able to walk in with some of the struggles of this offensive line group this last year. I don't know why he wouldn't be able to walk in and immediately earn a starting job.
Right.
I don't
And
know why.
not just that, but the thing that isn't, he elevates everybody else in the room.
Yeah,
Oh crap. I better get my stuff together. I can't miss workouts. I can't be late. Like that guy's breathing down my neck. Yeah.
yeah. And also, just as an aside, one of my favorite quotes, I was talking to somebody about Mateer, and one of my favorite quotes was, and I can't say the unedited version, but somebody said, he's just got some crap to him. He's just like he'll get on you. Like he
Yeah.
plays like he's got something to prove, and he plays like he's the best player on the field. I do think Oklahoma's going to need stuff like that.
Yeah.
Here's the thing, Brian. I got to be honest, man. And this is just my unfiltered thoughts as I think about what this first 3 years under Brent Venables has been like. I just they I actually think the thing that I've thought about more recently is that 22 season. And I've thought about that loss to Baylor at home, that awful loss to West Virginia. Probably the most miserable game I've ever been to in my whole life in any sport. The loss to Texas Tech. There are just even Florida State in the bowl game. Then I've thought about last year with you get the signature win of the Brent Venables era against Texas, and then you nearly blow it the next week to a really bad UCF team. Then you lose, just bad games to Oklahoma State and Kansas. Those are games that, you've got to win at least one of those games. I mean, that's the reality. They didn't even get to the Big 12 title game because they lost those two games.
Right.
And then I think about this past year, Brian, where there's just in the last 3 years, there's been two types of losses with Brent Venables in the last 3 years. Horrible close losses that they had no business losing, and then just embarrassing, just getting your face kicked in for 4 quarters. And I don't know, man. I would be honest, but I wouldn't be being honest if I said I have a concern about whether this regime has what it takes to win football games. And here's the other thing. I've talked to a couple people the last few days and the conversation has been, well, what does Brent have to do next year to keep his job? What does this team have to do? What's the win total? What does this team have to do? And a lot of the things I keep hearing is, well, they've got to be in the playoff discussion. They've got to be in the mix. And Brian, I'm just telling you this, and this is what I've told a couple people. If that's what you've got to do, if that's what Brent Venables has to do, fire him now.
Yeah.
There's no reason not. I mean, am I
Yeah.
saying it's impossible that could happen? No.
No.
But if that's the expectation, if that's the thing this team has to do, I just I don't see it. I
Yeah.
don't. And I think you might as well fire him now. All of this is in the context of Brian, we're 3 years into this thing, and that Navy game is part of why their OU should not have lost that game. There's no reason why they should have lost that Navy game. Yeah, were they shorthanded? Sure. Is it a meaningless bowl game? Sure. It was also kind of indicative of the way this 3 years has gone. They should have never lost that Navy game, dude.
Yeah.
Ever. And so I
Yeah.
think in terms of transitioning from positivity to negativity, and we should get into more specifics, but from a very broad perspective, this era has been defined by just head scratching losses and disorganization and dysfunction and one step forward and two steps back. And it's 3 years. It's not year one. It's not year two. It's 3 years of it.
Yeah.
That's the reality. I don't know. That's
Yeah.
that's the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah. The thing, the one, it's tough to start with this, but this is really like when I sit back and reflect on what we've seen for 3 years. Uh, the one quality that I was just absolutely certain Oklahoma football teams would have under Brent Venables whenever he was hired in 21 was discipline. Like that was the one, like you knew you had a really good idea that Oklahoma was going to play disciplined football. They weren't going to beat themselves. At no point, at no point has that been the case.
No.
That has been the most head scratching part of all of this for me because that that's really what it felt like Oklahoma needed to take the next step. Like if they could be more disciplined on, I mean, because defense is most of it is being disciplined, knowing what you're supposed to be doing, and regardless of what your eyes tell you, you do it. Like that's part of being good on the defensive side of the ball. Um, I don't know, man. Like that part is what's really tough for me to grasp because I felt that was going to be something that we saw come together, and it just hasn't. Now, is that because of the massive amount of turnaround that you've had on the roster? You've had this is your second season now in a row where you're having to hire an offensive and defensive coordinator. Um, you go from just year after year after year of incredible quarterback play to suddenly subpar quarterback play this last year. Like there are just so many intangibles, so many moving parts that it's hard to peg. But I would say the discipline was the one thing that just is to me. I just don't understand how that is still an issue. I mean, we were seeing it in the Navy game. That's the biggest thing. You have to be disciplined against a military academy. Those triple option offenses, and credit to Navy for running like it's a new style of triple option, but it's still the same thing. It's still the same principles. And Oklahoma got burned several times. Honestly, Jesse, I haven't gone back and watched that game. I'm never going to.
I'm not going to.
But
Once was enough.
right. There was at least a half dozen times where Navy has a touchdown
Yep.
Like if the quarterback's able to connect with somebody, Navy's got a touchdown, and he just overthrows them. Like, you know, that's all discipline. And I don't know. I just don't know where that comes from if it's not coming from the head coach, because
It's
that's
it's a discussion that you have to have. It just
yeah, it is,
is.
and it's
It
tough to have
is.
because it you know, you see it. I mean, it's not a. I'm not going to sit here and try and act like Brent Venables is putting on a facade of just this intense guy in front of a camera, and then when he's not in front of a camera, he's not. That's who he is, like to his core. That you, anytime you see him, cameras on or off, that's who he is. He's intense. He's demanding excellence. Like this is what he does. But the discipline just has not been there on this team, and I don't know why. I have no idea why. The other thing that is concerning is the way that this team has gone about its day to day as far as practices go, um, as far as uh, managing health and injuries and all of that stuff, the way that they go about their week to week. To this point, it's been really difficult for there to be any changes under this regime, like to have anything adjusted. And there have been some adjustments, but like if you didn't learn from 2024 that some things need to be changed, uh, I don't know that you can, because everything points to that. Like you know, things look a lot different if Dion Burks and guys are going to get hurt, but if you have some of those guys out there at wide receiver, like your offense looks different. Things look a lot different. That makes a huge difference. And uh, there's some changes that need to be made that have gotten pushed back in the past. And I think if you don't make those changes, if you don't find a way to find more discipline on the field, um, your results just going to be the same.
I even I even had and I've been in the thick of this for 3 years under Brent Venables now. And I hadn't really thought about it like this until somebody else on the beat kind of mentioned it to me. But it's even stuff like Brian, I mean, we get told every week there's a media availability time. We need to show up and then we'll get to talk to players. And then after the game, at some point we'll get to talk to Brent Venables and players. Brian, after post games, we're just sitting for minutes and minutes and minutes and minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, we've started making jokes about we literally start the clock as soon as the game's over. What time's the clock? What time did the game end? And how long does it take for Brent Venables to come in and start
Yep.
talking?
Yep.
And then when we show up for player availability during the week, it's we're told to show up at this time, but when does it actually start? And at first it's like, it's just, it's whatever, things are running long. To me, I'm wondering if stuff like that is just how things have just disorganization and a lack of details, which is ironic for a program that preaches the little things, for a program that preaches being on the details. And it's other stuff. And this is just, man, this isn't even talking about big picture stuff within games or big moves within the program. It's even like, how does Devon Mitchell not get on the field for a single snap against Navy?
Right.
When you look at this running back room and you've got Gavin Sawchuk, who was awesome to end 2023, but he enters the Navy game with 61 yards on the year. And your two freshman running backs, who had been two of the brightest spots all year, see a combined 10 touches in that Navy game. And instead, your running back who has 61 yards on the year is your lead running back. Like, there's just stuff like that all 3 years. Just stuff that doesn't make sense. And it seems disorganized and it seems like it's just chaos. I'll just be honest with you. And
Yeah.
part of it, I'm throwing in the media stuff mostly as a personal gripe for me, but also I don't think other programs deal with that kind of stuff. I don't think the media
Yeah.
for other programs deal with that kind of stuff. In fact, I know they don't.
Yeah.
There isn't that kind of disorganization. If you're told to show up at a certain time,
Hmm.
you show up at that time, and that's when the media stuff starts. It's
Right.
never been like that
Yeah.
under Brent. It just hasn't. And I just and then it's hard because you think about, well, yeah, if the wide receiver room had been fully healthy and you don't make the disastrous Seth Luttrell hire, which yeah, hindsight's 2020, but if you don't make that disastrous hire, are things different this year? Sure. But also I think they had a lot of guys healthy for the Oklahoma State and Kansas losses in 23,
Hmm.
games that they
Hmm.
should have won, games that kept them out of the Big 12 title game or
Yeah.
maybe the playoff. And here's the other thing for negativity. Have you looked at that schedule next year? Just as a reminder? I mean, Oklahoma,
Yeah.
everything could go right for this program. Everything could go right. And they still finish 7-5. They still finish 6-6. I mean, that's the reality here is everything could go right and it may not even matter that much.
Yeah.
So again, this all coming back to this feels like such a pivotal inflection moment for a program that has been very, very good for 25 years. Well, until this year in 2022. A program that has enjoyed incredible sustained success. And now you're heading into, you've just had 2 losing seasons in 3 years. And now you're heading into a season where, to me, it feels like we talk about the transfer portal and how much it can remake teams and boost teams and all this stuff. But I feel like it would also become easier to fall into the abyss
Yep.
if you're not careful. And
Yeah.
that's kind of what's all on the line here. And all of this is to say, Brian, that like there's been something in the DNA of this program over the last 3 years that we're just winning, sustainable winning, disciplined football have not been traits of this program. And they
Right.
have to be next year. Can you have confidence that that's coming?
You would better hope that your quarterback brings that with him. Um, that your offensive coordinator brings some of that with him. That I mean, it is players have to make the plays at the end of the day. Like, and there's been numerous cases on both sides of this where it was a coaching mistake or it was a player mistake. It all comes down. It all falls squarely on Brent Venable's shoulders. Like that's the unfortunate reality of being a head coach. You're responsible for all that stuff, and you're right. I mean, I think the most enjoyable years in recent years for Oklahoma, there was a there was always a feeling of, well, if Six gets the ball back, they're going to win this game. If Kyler gets the ball back, they're going to win this game. If Jalen Hurts gets an opportunity, they're going to win this game. You felt like there was an opportunity to go out and win. I mean, hell, even Landry Jones. If this offense gets the opportunity, they're going to go and win this thing. It's been the reverse. It's
Think
been
about
can they hold on? Can this team hold on? Okay, they've scored. They have the lead now. Can they hold on?
think about the gut punches, man, of the
Yep,
last 3 years. Missouri this year,
yep,
Army, Ole Miss when you're ahead at halftime. Um, they lost 4 games in 2022 by exactly 3 points or five. Is it five?
five.
5 points by 5 games by exactly 3 points. 2023, the 2 games that keep you out of the Big 12 title game, you
Mm-hmm.
lose by 4 and you lose by 5.
Yep.
I,
And I don't want to get too I don't want to generalize too much because the 6 and 7 from 2 years ago and the 6 and 7 from this year, it's totally different circumstances. But it's the same it's the same issues. Like the circumstances are different because it's in the Big 12, or your defense is the issue. You don't have issues at quarterback play, even though people back then would have told you you did. Um, the issues are the same. At the end of the day, when you needed it, you just didn't have it. And I think a lot of people back then would say, if you could go back, a lot of the narrative would be, well, I mean, as Coach Venables gets, more experience as a head coach, like some of these things will kind of fall to the wayside. He'll learn, he'll figure some things out. Um, you don't hear that anymore. I mean, 3 years, 3 years is in the grand scheme not really that long to get a program like Oklahoma going in the direction that you want it to, but you are not afforded any more time than that anymore. I mean, most places don't even give you 3 years to get things right. If you don't have it going in the right direction in year two, you're gone. So yeah, it's really tough to sit here and I don't want to say make excuses, but there are just so many things that have come down to lack of discipline, lack of killer instinct, just feeling like this team is finding new ways to lose football games rather than new ways to win them. Um, yeah, uh, when you look at the efficiency stuff, like that's really where when you look at the team efficiency this year. Um, I believe they were top. I believe they were top 10 in defense going into the bowl game. Defensive efficiency. I think they were top 25 in special teams efficiency, and then they were like 98th or 100 or something like that in offensive efficiency. Um, and that was like I felt almost generous. So if your offense is better, yeah, you're probably a better football team, but I don't know at this point.
The,
You've got to have a winning mentality, and right now, I can't believe I'm going to say this on a podcast, but I'm going to. Um,
say it.
I was having this conversation with somebody um, the other day on the phone, and they asked me what the difference was between this team and Oklahoma teams in 2017, 2016, 28, Um, and of course, there's the obvious is like, different head coach, different quarterbacks, blah, blah, blah. The makeup of those teams, those guys were winners. They were blue collar winners. The leaders of the team were winners, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Is there a player on this team that going into 2025 that has won a conference championship with Oklahoma?
Nope. Well, also considering they haven't even played for a conference championship
Right.
since 2020.
Right. Um, what I'm getting at is, and this is not an attack on anybody, on any single person. I'm not calling anybody names. In generalizations, right now, unfortunately, going into year 4 of the Brent Venables regime, this team has a lot of losers on it. It does. There are guys that have found a lot of familiarity in losing. They're familiar with losing. And that's it. You can turn that around, but you have to have somebody that's going to pick you up, dust you off, and help you do that. And it sounds really, it sounds rough. I know it does, but it's just the truth.
Headline: Brian Clinton calls the Oklahoma players losers.
That's not,
I under
that is,
no, they're used to losing. There's players on the roster are more used to losing than they are to winning. That's the reality. And I think the other thing that I've thought about is I think it's pretty clear, Brian. I think this if this was 2012 and you made Brent Venables the head coach, I
Mm-hmm.
honestly think he'd kill it.
Absolutely.
I think he not only, I mean, he's one of the best defensive minds in football, college football, or the NFL. He just is. But I think even put him as a head coach in 2012,
Mm-hmm.
because I think what we're seeing, why is the defense taking leaps? It's been a lot of the same guys in the system for all, those 3 years. You
Yep.
had guys at every position group that have been there. And we've seen guys get developed like, Peyton Bowen, Eli Bowen, Kip Lewis, Kobe McKenzie, Jaden Jackson this year. Um, but I wonder if you're having to not start over, but as exciting as it is to think about John Mateer and Ben Arbuckle, this
Mm-hmm.
is still, they're now tasked with turning around one of the worst offenses in the country
Yep.
in a brand new program with a lot of stuff on the line,
Yep.
and I just wonder in this era where you're losing guys. I mean, Lewis Carter hitting the portal hurts. I mean, man, that just hurts. Even if
Mm-hmm.
you get someone like Kendall Daniels, it just hurts.
Yep.
I just there's just a lot of reason to be skeptical because the other part of it too, and I'll say it again, things could go a lot better next year, and the schedule is so unforgiving it may not look better.
Mm-hmm.
But here's what you can say, Brian. You can say, look, if everything hits and Arbuckle is a revelation and John Mateer is the leader this team has not had since Brent Venables has been in town. And even though the defense is losing a couple of important pieces, the defensive production stays around the same. Maybe it even gets better. Maybe, I mean, because the flip side of it is the schedule's so unforgiving that if OU were to win 9 games, you're probably in the playoff.
Yep. Yeah, that Michigan game in the in
Yeah.
the non-conference. Yeah, that's different.
Oklahoma better win that game.
Yeah.
They better win that game. I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I don't. As
Yeah.
bad as some things feel right now, I don't. However, I do think we have enough of a sample size to suggest that if this team is going to turn things around, and if they're going to do that in this era of roster instability and changing front office structures and all this stuff, they're gonna. I think Brent Venables is gonna have to change
Yeah.
in some ways. Some ways you can give him credit for the defense and all that kind of stuff, but there's some of the things that are in the very fabric of this team over the last 3 years are going to have to change.
Yeah.
And you're gonna be leaning on Ben Arbuckle and John Mateer to revolutionize this offense.
Mm-hmm.
Could it happen? Yeah, it could happen. But this gets into the last part of the discussion, Brian, which was, and I mentioned this earlier, but I've had some people ask me, and I've asked some people, I mean, what does what does this team have to do for Brent Venables to stick around? And again, I think if you're approaching this as they've got to be in the playoff mix, not even necessarily make the playoff, but they've got to be on the fringes of the discussion. I think you're setting the program up for failure at
Yeah.
that point. But I mean, I don't know. I don't know. If you ask me right now what I think this team will do next year, I honestly couldn't tell you. I don't know.
No idea.
You could tell me. I mean, I think the ceiling of this team is going to be like 9-3, which would be a really good year. But
Yeah.
you could tell me it all falls apart again and they go, hell, 5-7. But in terms of what does this team have to do to where they're not looking for a new head coach next year? And once you start thinking about it, That's a really hard question to answer.
Yeah. Um, I don't know how many people have gone and looked at the Oklahoma schedule for 25 yet. I mentioned the Michigan game. After Texas, after the Texas game on October 11th, your schedule is at South Carolina, Ole Miss, at Tennessee, at Alabama, Missouri, LSU. Playoff team, verge of being a playoff team, verge of being a playoff team, playoff team, verge of being a playoff team, won 9 games, won 9 games. Not great, Bob. um, to me, if they win 8 games next year, if they go 8-4, I don't think you could
I,
fire the guy. Like
I
I,
would
I honestly, I don't think you could fire the
uh,
guy. Like if you go 7-5 and you dropped one of those games by like a point, I think it would be hard. Uh, but
see but that's the thing because here's the other thing though. If they go, because I agree with you, I think 8 wins with this schedule and what this program is coming off of, I genuinely think would be I'm not something to celebrate, but I think that's not awful. It's not
you
at
could point
all.
to it and say there's reason for optimism going forward.
Yes. I also think some of it's going to depend on how it looks because some of the way this team has looked in some of these games, Brian, the last 3 years has just been
Yep.
awful.
Yep.
And but I
Yep.
also think Brian, and I wrote this in a column not that long ago, which was I think fans may have to start preparing for the reality that at least for a little bit, that success is not defined by whether this team makes the playoff.
Hmm.
Because think about it, nearly every program goes through down stretches. Nearly every team goes through down years. I think that I think that portion of it's gotten distorted a little bit because of the portal and how much there's players moving around and how much the portal can bring potential in terms of turning your roster around. If you're
Mm-hmm.
Oklahoma, you can go 6-7 and add the number one guy in the portal.
Yep.
You just couldn't do that a
Right.
few years ago. At the
Yep.
same time, I I think the natural instinct for fans, and reasonably so, is to say, well, this team's got to make the playoff or it's a bad year. I think where you just listed off the schedule. Think about Bama and how disastrous their season felt. I mean, they had a good year. They got their ass kicked somehow by this really bad Oklahoma team. I still don't know how that happened. But like I mean, think about South Carolina, or actually, here's a better example. South Carolina, who had a really good year, had an argument to make the playoff. They went 9-3.
Yep.
That, at least in the short term, might have to be the way fans think about things.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, especially this isn't an OU team coming off of conference championships and playoff berths. This is a program that has not made a conference title game since 2020.
Yep.
They haven't even played for a conference title game and has now had 2 losing seasons in 3 years. It would be worth it to go through the numbers and any historical precedents to see what teams have had kind of insane turnarounds after having a 3 year stretch like this. But also some of that would be moot because this is the transfer portal era now. This is
Mm-hmm.
NIL era now. It's just different. Anyways,
Yeah.
we could go on and on about all this, but I do wonder. All of this went back to I don't really know how to judge what success would be like next year. There's so
Yeah.
much up in the air. It's going to be dependent on a ton of factors. But Brian, I'm just I, the reality might have to set in that it's been 25 years since Oklahoma won a national championship, and it's probably going to be a little bit longer. I mean, that's, you
Yep.
know.
Yep.
So if that's the standard we're still judging this team by next year, I think you're setting yourself up for failure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
E-
Um, well,
Or John Mateer comes in and the offense is great and OU wins 10 games. I don't
you know,
I don't know.
like here's it's really difficult to make these one-to-one comparisons because not every program is the same, but like the situation Notre Dame's in right now, like Brian Kelly was on the verge for years and years and years, and then he left, and now Marcus Freeman looks like he's got the best Notre Dame team in however long. Um, Penn State has been with James Franklin for years now, and there's been times where they wanted to get rid of him, but they didn't. And here he is, probably his best team yet in the portal era. Georgia's on its way kind of down, I guess, but a lot of that is tied with subpar quarterback play. The rest of their roster looked great, but their quarterback play was not great this year. Um, you know, I think you've reached a point in time where I don't know how successful even a guy like Nick Saban would be in the era of football that we are in right now. I think he got out for a reason. Um, Things are different than they were whenever he took over at Alabama. Actually, was reading his book, listening to his book on the way back home from Texas, and there are a lot of similarities between he and Brent Venables. He's probably better at adjusting things, from year to year because that's what made him so good for so long. But the intensity, the focus on details, all that stuff, defensive mind, all that stuff. I think the years of those guys, until at least until there's some more regulations and stuff, I think the years of those guys being uh, dominant in the sport are probably over for a while. Kenny Dillingham getting Arizona State within an inch of playing in the national semifinals with a roster that he has, like guys, Cam Scatterbo is amazing, but he was at Sacramento State 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Like it's just different now. Football is so much different now, and I think, like you said, there needs to be an adjustment to what expectations are because Kalen DeBoer going 9-3 or 9-4 at Alabama, and them calling for his head because they're used to winning championships. I think we might be seeing the end of an era of teams winning 3 championships in 4 years, 2 championships in 3 years. Like I just think football is changing that much, and it's for probably the better of the sport as a whole. But for dominant programs with long-standing traditions of excellence, uh, it's going to be a lot harder to maintain that.
Couldn't have said it better. Brian, we've been talking over an hour and I feel like we're just scratching the surface. But
Yeah.
we're going to hold off now because we're going to be back in just a few days with another episode of the Oklahoma Drill. Probably some more stuff to talk about by the time we get to that next pod. Till
And
then, huh?
and the Vikings will be NFC North champions at that point and the 1 seed
You're
in the
betting?
NFC.
You betting them to beat the
I'm
Lions?
not putting. I am not putting any money on the last time I bet on a Vikings game uh, was against the Bears in 2017 or 2018, I think. Khalil Mack had like 3 sacks, and I was like, yeah, I'm never betting money on this team again. But I am confident. I do feel pretty good about it.
I'm
So
rooting for Darnold, man. I'm rooting for him.
it's an awesome story.
It
It's
is.
awesome.
If you're not a member at over at ouinsider.com, never a better time to do that now. Head over there. We've got all kinds of info about any potential staff changes, transfer portal rumblings and lingerings as we get into early to mid January. Hoops begins their conference schedule tomorrow or Saturday against Alabama. Brody and I will have you covered there. all kinds of stuff you're not going to want to miss. Make sure you like and subscribe here at this OU Insider YouTube channel so you don't miss a single bit of our content here. Till then, appreciate you guys as always for tuning in. Thank you for listening to our State of the Union, our State of the Program here in Norman, Oklahoma. We'll catch you guys next week on another episode of the Oklahoma Drill. See you next time.
Skull!